Let's remove this wheel, 19mm socket, take off all 5 of your lug nuts. With this last one, the hubcap is going to want to come off if you have one. So just keep that in mind. Take that off, remove the wheel, give it a couple taps if it's stuck. So I'm going to start by breaking free this brake hose from the caliper. It'll be way easier to do it now as opposed to later. I'm going to use a line wrench, 17mm in size, and I recommend using a line wrench or a flare nut wrench because it'll grip onto more sides than just an open-ended regular wrench. There we go. Break that free. I'm just going to leave it a little bit snug for now, but not tight. That way fluid doesn't come out, but at least it's broken free and I don't have to struggle later. Now with a 14mm socket, I'm going to unbolt the caliper bracket directly from the knuckle, take the whole assembly off at once. This bolt is off, but I will leave it in a couple threads so it can hold the whole assembly for me while I take the top off. Let's get the top one off. All right. Now you can remove this bottom one. Take the whole bracket with the caliper, set it to the side. Let's take the 2 slider pins out of the new caliper so we can lubricate them. Still the same size, 14mm socket. Okay. There we go. Remember that this top slider has the rubber piece on it. You don't want to mix them up. Set those aside. I'm going to add grease to the inside of the boots. You can't add a lot to the sliders because it'll just get wiped off as you try to put them in. You don't need a whole lot, just enough to lubricate them for a while. There we go, work it into the boot there. And then you also want to take a little bit of grease, put it on these areas where the anti-rattle clips will ride. You don't need a lot. You don't want it to squeeze out onto the rotor. That's a little much. I'll wipe off some excess in a second. Make sure you do that on both sides. There we go. That's better. Take your new anti-rattle clips. Slide them on. Make sure it gets pressed down all the way. All right, do that to both sides. So now, because this top slider pin / mounting bolt is kind of interfering with the hose, you're going to have to put this one on now. So I'm going to send this one through the hole, put it on the threads, and tighten it up. It'll be pretty difficult for me to torque it. I can't get a socket on it once it's mounted, and if it's not mounted, if I try to torque it with my torque wrench, it's just going to spin the caliper in my hand. So that's why I just snugged it up nice and tight with my air gun. And then we'll lubricate this one right before it's about to go in. That way it doesn't get grease all over. So set this aside. Let's mount the caliper bracket onto the car. Slide the new caliper bracket on. Start on your mounting bolts, top and bottom. Once they're started, let's bottom them out and then torque them to 52 foot-pounds. Those are torqued. Now we have to get these pads out. The way to do that is I'm just going to take a pry bar and come right behind this outer pad, pry it in and up at the same time. That should make it pop off of the caliper. There we go. Set this aside. And the inner pad you can simply just remove by pressing it out of where it's mounted on the sides. There we go. Now you can set this caliper aside again. Take your inner pad and slide it onto the bracket, just like this. And then for the outer pad, it actually mounts to the caliper as you saw. So I'm going to add a little bit of grease to these two ears here. While I'm at it, might as well put some on the ring, outer ring of the piston. To install this pad, you kind of have to angle it. So find the right angle for it. It's going to fall right in. There we go. Make sure it's lined up flush with the caliper. And we can't put the caliper on yet because to take the line off, you actually have to spin the caliper around. So now it's time to go back to this old one now that we have everything prepared, ready for installation. It's time to go back to the old caliper. I'm going to get a collection bucket, and then we have to hold the line, spin the caliper off. Break this free again. Should be way easier now. And twist the caliper. Of course, fluid is going to start coming out, so keep that in mind. Make sure you support the caliper so it doesn't just drop to the ground once it's off the threads. Oh, there we go. Set this old one aside. Grab your new caliper and start it onto the threads. This is not going to be an easy task because you have to spin this whole caliper around while holding the hose steady. There we go. That's started onto the threads. Start it on all the way. It stopped right there, so let's give it a good snug. I'm going to get my open-ended wrench on here. Give this a nice good snug. That's perfect. At this point, we can add some grease to this. You don't want a lot, just a little bit. This is actually a little much. Make sure it goes all the way around. And now, you want to take the caliper, slide it in to the top here, just like that. Push it in all the way. Slide it over the rotor. Make sure the bottom lines up. Take your bottom slider, grease this one up a little bit. Make sure you get grease in that ridge over there. That's where the boot seals up. Okay, slide it through, snug it up, and then we'll torque it to 32 foot-pounds. Now, of course, that same torque applies to the top slider as well, but like I said earlier, it's going to be a little difficult to torque, which is why I didn't. Okay, I got to set this to 32. That's 32 right there. Now let's open up the bleeder screw. I'm going to remove this cap first. Then use your 8mm. And we'll let gravity do its thing and pull the fluid down, push the air out of the caliper. This is called a gravity bleed. Of course, after this, you will need to perform a full manual brake bleed. That's going to consist of, first of all, checking your master cylinder to make sure it's still topped off and full. And then have someone inside the vehicle pump up the brakes. Once they are pumped up 3-4 times, have them hold pressure on the brake pedal. With pressure being held, come out here and open the bleeder screw. Fluid and air will come out. Close up the bleeder screw once the pedal has reached the floor, and repeat that process until you have clean fluid with no air coming out of here. And at the end, you'll want to double check your master cylinder again to make sure that it's full. But for now, we'll just wait for gravity to do its thing. As you can see, we have a nice steady trickle of fluid here. So we're going to close this up and then perform the manual brake bleed like I was talking about. And once you are done with your manual brake bleed, you can go ahead and clean all this off. And don't forget to reinstall this cap. That's what's going to prevent debris from getting into your bleeder and clogging it up. At this point, pump up your brakes, and let's put on the wheel. Now before you put on your lug nuts on this, because we have a hubcap that actually gets held on by the lug nuts, you have to put this on first. And there's a cutout here that has to line up with your valve stem. Otherwise it won't sit on properly. So now that this is on, you can put on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then torque them to 100 foot-pounds. There you go.